Inception was a film 10 years in the making, and that's being conservative. It could be argued that it was an almost lifetime development by Nolan. As is rather obvious, Christopher Nolan rarely adopts a mainstream strategy. A tale of revenge for the murder of a man's wife in Memento is a fragmentary journey that exposes self-deception at its most literal. A tale of rival magicians in The Prestige shows sleight of hand give way to actual impossibility. Even the Dark Knight trilogy gives Batman a journey with a start, middle, and end, instead of being open-ended as is usually the case in superhero works. He remains a holdout on the use of 35mm film rather than the digital filmmaking that is almost universally employed. And he's opposed to the strategy of simultaneous streaming and theatrical releases. And his film Tenet was the most notable pandemic-era theatrical release last year. So while Nolan had been working for some time on a corporate espionage picture, it didn't truly become a Nolan project until he realized how he could fuse it with a long-term reflection of his, which was the nature of dreams. He explains that this started in college, and it's thanks to free breakfast. Nolan, on the one hand, enjoyed staying up late into the night, but also enjoyed to have his free breakfast the next day, which happened to end at 9. So he would get up just to have breakfast, and then be so exhausted he'd go back to bed for 2 or 3 hours more. But because of that cycle of sleep, he found that he was sleeping in such a way that he was doing what he called active dreaming, in that he realized he was dreaming and could begin to control it. He was fascinated that he could just pick up a book off a shelf in his dream and there would be words in it, his brain simultaneously inventing words and experiencing reading those words without knowledge of what they were going to say. Or that you have a conversation with someone in your dream, but there is no other person. You are inventing that person's words while simultaneously not knowing what they're going to say or why they're saying it. The power of the human mind to invent believable constructs in real time was incredible to him. He realized this provided an entire new element for his corporate espionage picture, the ability to set it outside of our reality. However, just because it was outside of our reality doesn't mean that he wanted it divorced from reality. Nolan wanted his film to be different from The Matrix, which he thought was great, but also seemed to lack any sort of rules. The characters could do anything after all because it was The Matrix. It was just allowed. He wanted the dreams to have clear-cut rules to them. He wanted, in contrast to the seeming chaos and randomness of dreams, to have the characters understand the hard and fast absolute rules that govern dreaming, and the need to overlay order over the chaos in order to do what they do. They could alter the dreams as needed, with architects crafting the dreams and the ability to play with that architecture. But it required greater subtlety in manipulating the dreamer, rather than having the ability to fly like Neo. This led Nolan to structure the story as more of a heist, since it would emphasize planning and deception, carefully conning the target so as not to pull them out of the dream. At the same time, Nolan struggled against the genre traits of a heist movie because they tended to be superficial in his view, more concerned about style than about emotions, which he felt was essential in something so universally human as dreaming. Nolan says that in his films, he wants to create worlds that will go on living in the minds of the audience, so fully developing the world and its boundaries was very important to him. What had pleasantly surprised him about the response to the film Memento was not an appreciation on a technical level, that it was something artistic or clever. If you are unfamiliar with Christopher Nolan's breakout film, Memento is the story of Leonard, who is seeking revenge on the man who killed his wife. But when the man killed her, he also gave Leonard brain damage so that he can't transfer short-term memory to long-term memory. Essentially, if you've ever walked into a room and forgotten why you've done so, that's basically how Leonard lives. He never knows the context of his current situation, just finding himself in it. To have the audience feel what he feels, the movie is presented in snippets, each one showing what happened in the scene before the last scene. So the audience goes into every scene with no knowledge of what's going on. and each snippet is separated by a black and white conversation that Leonard is having that explains his condition and how he copes with it, until the past conversation leads into the present that we have been seeing. It is obviously, from this description, structurally complex, but what Nolan learned was that the audience didn't regard it as a gimmick picture. They just liked the movie because it was a good movie. It's sadly common that Hollywood treats complexity and mainstream as being contradictory, but Memento convinced Nolan that audiences can be trusted far more than conventional wisdom said they could. But this, Nolan stresses, comes from a desire to satisfy himself. He just knows that the audience is seeking the same kind of thing that he is, someone willing to try something new and different. Nolan's approach to films is to try to explore new territory and assume that the audience will want to make the effort of coming along because it's something fresh. Nolan's concern is that he wants to make a film as clever as it needs to be while never making the audience walk away thinking he was trying to be clever. Being clever is not a goal. It just happens to be a byproduct of making the film the way that it should be. Of course, the greatest obstacle to the heist film was the lack of an antagonist, the person attempting to upset the plans of the heroes in their theft. Certainly the target would not want to be manipulated or to have their secrets exposed, but Nolan felt that an antagonist was called for, someone who was on the one hand actively thwarting the efforts of the heroes while simultaneously being unable to do anything as simple as just waking up the target. Being a construct of the target's mind would work, certainly, but would be deficient in several ways. First, the hero would be defeating a phantom, just a subconscious part of the target's mind, so there was nothing impressive about that. And second, there was no emotional aspect to it. The villain was just an obstacle that had to be overcome. It would literally be no different than beating a boss in a video game. Nolan hit upon the idea of the hero bringing his own antagonist in with him, his former partner in crime who had once betrayed him. He believed that because of the role of the subconscious, that whatever your intentions, there would be things happening in the dream that could be counterproductive or even mission-ending. But that wasn't enough. It was interesting, but it didn't actually go anywhere emotionally. Yes, overcoming the antagonist was now facing down a part of himself, but that was all that he was doing, triumphing over his old partner once again. Without that emotional aspect, the film lacked an ending, a satisfying one anyway. It finally occurred to Nolan that the real answer wasn't someone the hero should hate. What would give the emotional power is to make the obstacle someone he loves. Having to confront and defeat them would be more than just triumphing over a ghost. It would require facing his own demons. Of course, the film wasn't worked on for 10 years unceasingly. Whenever he finished a film, he would naturally begin looking for his next project, and he would bring out the Inception script to work on it. This helps somewhat because Nolan prefers to write the final draft of all of his scripts, even when he is working with a writing partner, so that he could provide a critical eye to the work. The time gaps helped with that somewhat, since Inception was one of those times he was crafting from whole cloth, so he could look each time with relatively fresh eyes and question his past decisions. When you're on your own for months and months and months, he said, it's much harder to be objective about it. Nolan credited his cast as well for the help there. He compares the role that Leonardo DiCaprio had in this film with that of Guy Pearce in Memento, of needing to show the inner structure of this strange thing so they could understand what was happening. Nolan feels that he's been very fortunate with the casting of his films. They not only have a good, strong grasp of the characters they're playing, but the logic, or lack thereof, in things. Sometimes there were questions that he just couldn't answer, or he could not answer satisfactorily for them, and so he would re-examine the work, see if he was cheating, using his cast as a secondary layer to the creation process by seeing if this film could get past their own personal BS detectors, because if it couldn't with them, it probably couldn't with the audience. DiCaprio was cast in the role of Cobb, the protagonist, and his devotion to the character convinced Nolan that he needed to substantially rewrite the script, An enormous undertaking during pre-production, to be sure, but necessary to get the character where they needed it to be. If Cobb was the emotional through line, then compromising Cobb's character would compromise the film. DiCaprio had been Nolan's hope for the lead, as he found him to have produced good work previously and would have the dedication and discipline to handle what the role needed. Consequently, the casting process involved bringing in actors who could perform well with DiCaprio specifically. Cillian Murphy, who had played Scarecrow in Nolan's Batman Begins and cameoed in the role in the following two films, was tapped as the man at the center of the heist, an heir to a corporate empire who must be convinced by a revelation in his dreams to break up his father's company. Michael Caine, who has gone on to appear in almost all of Nolan's work since Batman Begins, took on the minor role of Cobb's mentor, and the father of the woman who now disrupts Cobb's work in dreams. Ken Watanabe, also from Batman Begins, plays the role of their client, industrial giant Sato, who insists on going into the dreams with them, serving a vital audience surrogate character, along with Elliot Page as the architect Ariadne, being the new characters who can have things explained to them then. Ariadne was so named because of the role of mazes in the film. In mythology, she was the one who provided Theseus with the Strigan sword for the labyrinth. Marianne Cotillard, the wife, Tom Hardy, the forger, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Cobb's partner, would all return in Nolan's next picture, The Dark Knight Rises. Steven Spielberg would later point to Nolan and Inception when asked the question about making art films or big-budget studio films as an example of how you could do both. Inception was indeed an ambitious undertaking, being filmed in 6 countries across 4 continents, and foregoing computer-generated effects when possible. I hesitate to even refer to them as practical effects, even though that is the term you're supposed to use, but when you hear some of the things done, you might understand why. The restaurant explosion with DiCaprio and Page in the middle of it was enhanced by special effects, yes, but there were simulated explosions going on around them, air blasting out debris to mimic the appearance of an explosion. Air cannons were also involved in shooting the van off the side of the bridge, so as to allow for it to follow almost exactly the same path every time that they needed to do it. The fight in the hotel hallway was done using a set that could spin. Gordon-Levitt was doing his own stunts in most of that. The hotel bar was designed to tilt on cue, and extras were hired by their ability to maintain the same position even though the room was tilting. About a third of them couldn't do it. The train driving down the center of the street was actually a train shell placed over a tractor trailer. Even the avalanches were actual avalanches, created by professionals who know how to do it safely. Yet despite all of that, the film, it sounds like one of those typical artiste gone mad epics that go massively over budget. In reality, Inception was completed early and under its $160 million budget. The enormity of the film, though, was part of the reason that it took so long to be made. Nolan hadn't yet been offered the chance to do Batman, and was unsure if he could make an enormous picture like the one that was on the page. But the experience of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight helped to make it possible. The result was critical and financial success, making over $800 million and earning 4 Academy Awards, plus a nomination for Best Picture. Tomorrow, we'll take a look at the film itself, Inception.